Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to this video where I want to share with you some of my highlights among the many developer-related features that have been announced a few days ago at WWDC 2024. Before we start, you can notice that I'm not in my usual setup, and the reason is that I'm actually on site in Cupertino to attend WWDC 2024. So before I begin the actual video, I wanted to take the time and extend a big thank you to both Apple for giving me a ticket to attend and also to Photoroom who paid for the trip. So let's actually get started. So first thing I wanted to highlight, you might have heard about it actually just a bit before WWDC, but it's the 10 years of Swift. Swift was actually announced at WWDC 2014, so 10 years ago. It was happening just a little bit before WWDC this year. That's why you might have heard about the 10 years anniversary at the end of last year. But it's very exciting to see how long and how far Swift has come. And you'll see that there were some pretty interesting announcements for Swift in the WWDC keynote and platform State of the Union. So first thing I wanted to talk about are the many AI, Apple Intelligence related features. There were so many of them, and they were definitely what caught everyone's, myself included, attention. But I wanted to focus here on how these features integrate within your app. What's really interesting is that you can see here that all of the AI features that are about rewriting or proofreading or summarizing text are implemented in a very native way, in such a way that any app that uses a text field, a standard text field or standard text view will benefit from it. Personally, I think it's gonna be really nice for us developers because first, it means that we don't need to make any specific effort. We benefit from the feature just like we benefit from features like copy and paste, simply because they are built-in features of text input components. But also, I think it will be very nice for users that they will be able to use the same AI engine everywhere. Because these days you have several apps that all offer their own AI engines, but as a user, if you need to keep in mind how each of them work and how each of them might differ slightly in their features or in the result that they give, it's actually quite complex to manage. I don't think that I could manage it from a user point of view. So seeing that now there will be a single entry point when you want to have AI help you rewrite text, and that you will be able to use the same model and the same UI interface across all apps, that gets me particularly excited. Another AI feature that was announced was the ability to create your own custom emojis using generative AI. One thing that's very interesting here from a developer point of view is that this is not built in directly, or rather it's more opt-in. You need to add some code in order to say that you want to allow this feature, and the reason is that whereas regular emojis are actually encoded as a text because the set of emojis is finite and predefined, these generated emojis need to be stored as images, and so you need to make sure that you're actually able to use these generated emojis whenever the rest of your app processes the text that the user has written. So my understanding is that these generated emojis are stored using an attributed string, and so if you want to support them into your app, you will need to set the property supports adaptive image glyph to true. Next, let's talk a bit about Image Provider, so which is kind of like the Midjourney equivalent that's now built into the Apple ecosystem. It's available both as a standalone app, but it's also available as a UI component that you can integrate into your own apps, and doing so is pretty easy. So this is a piece of code that they showed in the platform State of the Union, and you can see that you only need to use the modifier image playground sheet, which shows the view to generate an image. You can see that the syntax to do it is very similar to showing any kind of sheet in a SwiftUI app, and then you get back a URL that you can process in a closure in order to handle the image that's been generated. So you can either save it locally, send it to your backend, you can do whatever you need to do with it. And you can see that you can even give some indication for what they call the concept, which from what I understand is what other AI systems would call the prompt. So you can give some context that is either relevant to your user or to your app or to both. So that seems to be quite an easy API to integrate. And if you have an app that, for instance, want to give the feature where users can easily define their own profile picture, it can be a great way to do it with probably an added advantage, which is that I'm pretty sure that the images that this generative AI will create are I'm pretty sure that they are guaranteed to be safe for work, and so you don't need to do moderation on what users will be using as their images. And this is a screenshot from what they showed during the platform State of the Union, where you can see the result of the code that I've showed you being executed and being run into an actual iOS app. So next, they talked a lot about app intents, which makes sense because app intents are tightly linked to Siri, and Apple Intelligence is also tightly linked to Siri. So they said that they've improved app intents so that now Siri will be able to actually take control of your app and perform operations on behalf of the user. So as often with this kind of improvement to app intents, not all business domains will be covered at first, but these business domains should be covered when iOS 18 releases. And so if your app fits inside one of these domains, or if some features of your app fit inside these domains, you will be able to take advantage of this new capability. But they also showed that normally any app should be able to let Siri integrate with the menu of the app. So they showed the example of the Keynote app where you can ask Siri to show the presenter note and Siri is able to do it. And my understanding is that probably this takes advantage of the fact that the menu items, they have labels in text that describe them. Sometimes they even have accessibility labels that bring out even more information. And so Siri can leverage that information in order to be able to translate a request from the user into knowing which button must be triggered in order to fulfill the request expressed by the user. Next, we get into a topic that got me really excited, which is about having a ChatGPT or Copilot-like integration into Xcode. As it turns out, we are very lucky because we get both type of integrations into Xcode. So let's start with predictive code completion, which sits at the same level than a Copilot integration. So you can see that it's the same UX. You start writing something and then the system, the AI suggests something that you can then accept by typing on the tab key. So very similar to Copilot. So you can see here, it suggests to store an array of videos using a type that's already defined inside the project, but it can also define the implementation of full functions. So here, someone starts to write videos and then an S, and it suggests the name sorted by a release date, and then it also suggests the implementation of the full function. It can even go further if you write the signature of a function and then a comment giving a hint as to what the code should do. So if you remember 2 years ago, a bit more than 2 years ago, I did a video where I tried out Copilot with Swift Code. I remember that back then I had been pretty impressed because I had used Copilot to help me doing a simple refactor to turn an MVC app into an MVVM app, and I was pretty impressed by what Copilot had been able to achieve, and it was 2 years ago. So this is likely to be even better than that. So I'm really curious to see how it's going to work. Whenever I can, you can count on me to make a live stream to explore the feature. This feature requires, of course, Xcode 16, but also the new macOS, so macOS Sequoia. So I haven't been able to install the beta of the new macOS yet, but I'm very eager to try out this feature, and you can count on me to make a lot of content about this feature during the summer. And another last use case that they showed for this predictive code completion is being able to write a simple version of the body of a view that you can then iterate on. And I feel this use case of generating a basic boilerplate is really nice, and it's something that I can really imagine myself writing a lot. And also, even from my special situation of a content creator, I feel like this could help me a lot during live streams because it will be able to take a lot of my attention away from just remembering which API to call and focusing more on how to refine the UI, which is arguably something more interesting for me to do during a live stream. And by the way, I forgot to say, so I did say that you need macOS Sequoia installed to run the predictive code completion, but you also need to have a chip with Apple Silicon, so M1 and further. So if you have an Intel-based Mac, unfortunately, you won't be able to use this feature. And I don't see it in this slide, but I think you also need 16 gigabytes of memory in order to use these features. So we've seen the Copilot-like integration. Now let's see the ChatGPT-like, which is named Swift Assist. And you can see it's very similar to ChatGPT. You have this little text field at the bottom of Xcode, of the editor in Xcode, which allows you to write, which is for all intent and purposes a prompt. So for instance, you can write, create a list of classic Macs with name and description. And you can see that it's going to generate the code directly into the editor. It's going to create the struct, it's going to create some sample data, which I think is a great use case for this type of feature, and also generate a simple version of the body of a view. So this feels really, really similar to ChatGPT, but a ChatGPT that's deeply integrated into Xcode, so you don't need to copy your code into ChatGPT and then copy back into Xcode. And also what they said during the Platform State of the Union is that this AI has been trained specifically on Apple code. So it's likely to be even more knowledgeable than ChatGPT when it comes to Apple APIs. Especially, you might have seen that sometimes ChatGPT struggles with APIs that have been introduced after its cutoff learning date. Hopefully, the Swift Assist feature will be able to improve on these limitations. And you can see that they even demonstrated some more complex use cases, like asking Swift Assist to play a sound when a Mac is tapped, so in the UI. And you can see that Swift Assist added an instance of AV audio player. We can imagine that further down in the code, it also added code to start to play audio clips into the audio player. So they didn't show the full code. I haven't been able to try the feature. So I would really want to see the feature in action to make sure that it manages the audio player in a nice way, because audio player, it's this kind of components where you can mismanage it and maybe play too much audio one over the other or leak memory. So I would be very curious to see how it uses it. But I feel like this kind of Apple API where an AI has been trained specifically on how to use them could bring a lot of value. So once again, do expect me to create content around this during the summer. And I also wanted to share this screenshot from the Platform State of the Union where they showed some of the use cases that Swift Assist can be useful for. And I wanted to show it to you because many of these use cases, they could also be features that either the refactoring tool could offer, or even macros in some cases. I'm thinking of making a function asynchronous. So it shows that this Swift Assist feature, it really sits in a place that's somewhere in between macros, which are very low level, very predictable ways to generate code, and ChatGPT, which is a much more probabilistic generation engine that's going to generate stuff and that might work or not. So hopefully Swift Assist will be more reliable than ChatGPT when it comes to Apple code, but it will also be way easier to use than macro is. But I was really, when I saw this screenshot, it really impressed me that I was like, they could have given the same screenshot with many of these names of use cases for the macros last year. And so I found the similitude quite interesting and worth mentioning in this video. Next, I wanted to show you this nice little improvement of the debugger. When you are inspecting stack trace, you can see that now all of the frames of the stack trace will be consolidated into a single view. And so as you scroll up, you'll be able to navigate into the stack. So that might be quite useful in order to be able to more easily reason about your code, because when you try to debug a complex stack trace, you very easily end up jumping from one place to the code to another, and then it can become confusing which code is where. So having everything into a consolidated view can probably be very useful, especially when you need to debug an issue that is not trivial. And by that I mean an issue that maybe involves like half a dozen or more memory frames. Next, we talk about Swift 6. So that's it. Swift 6 has been released, and the big feature of Swift 6 is data race safety, because Swift 6 has the goal of enabling data race safety at compile time. This means that the language now has enough features so that the compiler can say at compile time, this code should not be able to produce a data race at runtime. So they gave this recap of everything that was introduced over the years on the different releases of Swift 5. So async await task and actors with Swift 5.5, which I think is the one that we are all very familiar with. Then pre-concurrency and incremental migration to migrate to the more secure concurrency APIs. The introduction of sendable and distributed actors in Swift 5.7, and I'm sure that sendables brings you out of memories related to warnings in Xcode. Swift 5.9, which added custom executors and isolation assertions, and Swift 5.10, which full data isolation and isolated globals. By the way, full disclosure, I am not sure what a good third of these things actually mean. So that shows you how much of a complex topic that is. And so with Swift 6, this all culminates in the ability to enable data race safety. One thing that's very interesting is that, so they showed the example that Swift 6 will be able to alert you whenever a piece of your code has the potential to create a data race, but they also highlighted the fact that you won't need to migrate all of your code, all of your dependencies at once. You can migrate progressively. And I think it really shows that the team that works on Swift is aware that it's a challenge to do this migration. You need to learn a lot of new concepts. As I've told you, I don't know a good third of the concepts that were on the previous slides. So don't panic. You will have time to make your changes. But still, I think that as an iOS developer and a Swift developer, we've probably reached a moment where it's really worth checking out the details of the feature that Swift 6 uses, because at some point you will have to use them. And so I guess now is the best time to start learning them into details. And of course, you can imagine that I will try to offer some content around this topic during the summer to help you make this transition in your code. And now we're getting near the end of the announcements. I think this is the last big announcement, but it's still quite an interesting announcement. So last year we had Swift Data, which was a Swift version of Core Data, or rather a Swift twist on the features offered by Core Data. And this year we have Swift Testing, which is a testing framework written in Swift, so which is going to pick up the mantle from XC testing, which was a framework written back in the days of Objective-C, and that was quite old. I think it's more than 15 years, might even be 20 years ago. So it's a fully Swift syntax. It leverages macros a lot. You can see the macro add test to annotate a function. You can see the macro pound require, which from what I understand is going to make sure that a function that returns an optional does not return an optional, and if it does return an optional or throws, is going to make the test fail. And expect, which allows you to pass in conditions that might be predicates or that might just be any expression that leads to that evaluates to a boolean. So when you look at it, it doesn't seem that different from what XCTest was able to offer, especially with the changes that were made in the past few years, but it still offers the same feature, but in a more Swift way, which is pretty nice and is way more future-proof, and also opens the way to some really exciting feature that I want to show you just after. So among these exciting features, the first one that they showed was the ability to tag a test using a type-safe approach, and this will allow you to create test plans that will be able to run tests according to their tags. So interesting, but not something super exciting. But what's really exciting comes just after. It's the ability to also add arguments to a test, and then these arguments will be used in order to run the test several times with these different values. So this is already pretty exciting, but it gets even better when you start to imagine that the values that are in the arguments array will probably be able to be generated using either Swift Assist or predictive code completion. And that will be quite powerful, because having code that tests your code with one set of parameters is one thing, but having code that tests a piece of code with half a dozen or even more sets of parameters that cover maybe more edge cases is way more powerful. So this is something that I'm very excited about, and it might be one of these use cases that nicely manages to mix both Swift capabilities and AI code generation capabilities. And they show that in Xcode, when you run such a test, you will see each run of the test with each set of arguments be presented with its own view. And so if one of these iterations fails, you'll be able to debug it independently. Next, I wanted to highlight a nice piece of info that was shared during the Platform State of the Union, which is the fact that the Apple teams use SwiftUI more and more internally. So the new image provider view is built using SwiftUI, and so is the new Passwords app. And I think it's interesting and good to know about it, because as you probably know, if you've ever built SDKs or APIs, it's very hard to build good tooling that you don't use yourself. And so seeing that Apple is dogfooding SwiftUI a lot is a good signal that's sent to the developer community, because it means that Apple will have a strong incentive to try and fix any either issues or missing features that they can find within SwiftUI. And to finish, I want to share some nice little additions that were added to either Swift or SwiftUI. So first, an @previewable macro has been added to previews, which allows you to use @state within previews. Before it wasn't possible. There was actually a trick to make it work, which was basically you had to encapsulate your @state property into a view that has the sole purpose of just owning the add state property. Now it's no longer the case. You can use this add previewable macro. I haven't been able to see which code the macro generates, but I will be looking into that because I'm super curious to know if it actually just generates a wrapper view like I was doing until then. But it's nice to see that now we have this nice user-friendly solutions we'll be able to use. Next, Apple also shared that several very central APIs in both UIKit and SwiftUI are being unified in the sense that for gestures, for instance, you will be able to create shared gestures that will be able to be triggered either from SwiftUI and UIKit. So it can be very interesting if you create a complex gesture. For instance, think about the case where you have a gesture to be able to pinch to increase the size or reduce the size of a picture and also rotate it. If you have a canvas with the image in both a UIKit and SwiftUI view, up until now you had to implement two gesture recognizer, and I actually had to deal with this use case 1 year ago. Now you will be able, from what I understand, to create a single gesture recognizer that you will then be able to use in both a SwiftUI and a UIKit context. And same thing for animations. Animations for SwiftUI, UIKit, and AppKit have been unified, and so you can define an animation in SwiftUI and then trigger it from UIKit, which might also be super useful, especially if you have the kind of patterns where you have integrated, for instance, you have a big UIKit view, but a part of it is made in SwiftUI and you want your animations to all play nicely together and you don't want to share and create a lot of code just to be able to synchronize animations together. Then we have some nice improvements to Swift data, like the ability to create an index for given properties so that when a query uses these properties, the query is more likely to run fast because an index will have been created beforehand for faster access to these specific properties, or the ability to have Swift data enforce uniqueness for properties that should be unique across instances so that no two instances can share the same value for the same property. Also, Swift data is gaining the ability to use more than a core data store to store data, but you can now use more custom stores from SQLite to your backend or even to a basic JSON file that you are managing inside the files of your app. And last thing I wanted to share is the ability to create custom control widget that will appear in the control center. So as you can imagine, this will be done fully using SwiftUI and by implementing a view that will conform to the protocol control widget. So you can see an example of the code right here, and it will enable you to achieve this kind of thing. So being able to add some features of your app accessible through the control center. So of course, it's the kind of features that don't make sense for every single app out there. But if you have an app for which it makes sense, you will definitely want to check it out during the summer, especially because in addition to enabling access to your app from the control center, I think it also works to enable controlling this widget from either the action button from the iPhone 15 Pro onwards, and also you are now able to switch the default actions that are on the lock screen. So it used to be, I think, flashlight and camera, and now you can switch it to your own custom control widget. So if you have the use case for it, I think you will definitely want to check it out during the summer. And that's it. I think I've covered everything I wanted to share with you. You might have noticed, given my voice during the video, that I'm actually a bit sick. That's the reason why you get this video later in the week than I would have liked. I was actually super sick on Monday, so I had to wait until I was in a state where I can be presentable enough for the video. But I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you're as excited as I am with all of the new features. Please don't hesitate to tell me in the comments which features gets you the more excited. This way I can know what I should focus on when I'm going to create content over the summer. And I guess I just have to say, if you liked the video, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the next videos. And as always, thank you for watching and see you next time.